It's lovely to see everyone. This is the third of our webinars now, and I think, like Ashley was saying, these have been really successful. We're really pleased to see, a regular audience of familiar and new faces turning up to this format, and I think it's something that we might consider in future years as well. So those of you who don't know, my name's Carl, and I'm at Swansea University in the business school there. And I'm just sharing this one with my colleague Adele from Sheffield Hallam. And the focus today was really new horizons in adventure tourism research. And we're really lucky to have 6 speakers today looking at the postgraduate work that they've been doing, and I think it's nice to finish on this one because it is the future, I suppose, of adventure tourism research. So we've had a couple of good sessions. We had the one on micro adventures, and then last week we had Pete was chairing a great session on finding the trouble, which seemed really core to adventure. And then this kind of really moves us forward, and we've been lucky enough to obviously have a look at the abstracts and stuff, but I'm very excited to hear about the work that you guys have been doing. When we sort of originally thought about this session, we thought we'd kind of have it as more of a workshop format, but didn't we, Adele? I think we were sort of thinking about how we could help you guys, because I think a lot of the time the postgraduate journey is quite lonely. And I think maybe that's come out in some of the discussion we've just been having, isn't it? That sometimes, and even more so in COVID times, that we're sort of stuck in our little bubbles, aren't we? But so we sort of we wondered how we could help you out, maybe with tips about what happens after the PhD and making your contribution and getting through the viva and all of those sort of practical elements. When we got the abstracts, we then sort of thought, there's some great stuff here. We just need to listen to what you guys are saying. So by all means, if we've got a bit of time, maybe we can still have space for that. But we also, I think we're going to maybe explore options for that in the future. Is that kind of, I don't know, did you want to say anything on that, Adele?
No, thanks, Carl. That summarizes it really well. So yeah, if there's anything that you would like, if you feel we could support you in any way with your doctorate journey or postdoctorate journey, please do get in contact. We're happy to put on some online workshops that are tailored towards specific areas that you think could support you, and hopefully going forward in the future, if we have face-to-face conferences, we might be able to do some specific sessions there as well. But because we've got some new faces here, which is absolutely wonderful. We are a really friendly group, a nice community, and you're doing your doctorate can be quite lonely, and you're often in maybe departments that you might not sure as if you fit in within your institution. So if you ever want to speak to anyone outside of your supervisory team or outside of your institution, please do call on us. We're here, to support you in any way we can and to listen to your research ideas. I think that's
yeah. So I think the plan was sort of 10-minute presentations with some time for sort of question and answers around that, and I think we've got a bit of wriggle room. We still haven't seen Thomas yet, have we? But hopefully he'll drop in. I'm not seeing him on the list, but everyone else is here, and he's not until after we were going to have a 10-minute break in the middle for people to rush off and get a coffee. Well, it's not sort of next door for most people in this in the Zoom world, isn't it? We don't even have to go down the corridor, but there you go. And the other thing to say is that, it's really exciting to see the sort of the maturity, I suppose, of the research that's coming through, isn't it? Because we're now, next year, I just was looking, it will be our 10th anniversary, I think, of APTRA, which I think we'll be able to celebrate, hopefully, fingers crossed, with obviously the New Zealand conference at the end of the year, if people are able to make that. So that's very exciting. So I guess, let's make the most of the time for discussion then. And, we're slightly ahead of schedule, but if Chris, if you're happy to, we've tested the presentation. If you're happy to get going, then let's do it.
Yeah, no, good morning, everyone. yeah, really honoured to be here, and to go first as well. It's kind of nice to go and put my perspective out. So I'm going to talk about my thesis, I guess, as most people are, and the title is Developing the Independent Adventurer. So my background, bit about me: I've worked in adventure sports coaching for quite some time, and I come at it from a kind of dual perspective. There is definitely a sports motor skill performance type aspect to it, but it's also, you know, a huge part of adventure tourism. And I'm not going to obviously go through like blow by blow my whole thesis, because that would be quite something. But I'll try and pull out the strands that seem relevant to adventure tourism, and particularly in the new directions with that. So one of the first things that I kind of considered with my research and my perspective is working out what we mean by adventure. I still find there's quite a lot of issues with that in terms of what the, you know, perspective. And this little meme I really enjoy, particularly when it's like, I think I'm doing something super rad and going out kayaking for fun, and really I'm just pottering around with my friends having a nice cup of coffee. But of course, in the public perspective, there's lots of ideas of extreme sports, and that I think is, you know, a misconception. There's much more to it beyond performance. So again, if you look from the perspective of national governing bodies, they get bogged down in the actual details of how the paddling works or how climbing works, rather than maybe the ideas of self-efficacy, or about finding oneself, or about social bond, or green physical activity, and being outside in nature, blue space, green space, kind of well-being. So I wanted to undertake a research project back about 5 years ago when I started, that explored what adventure is, what it means, and then how we can, and this was a job I was finding as a coach, how we can develop learners who want to realize their own independence. And so it felt like a PhD or a professional doctorate was the right way of going about that. And I've obviously considered some research methods appropriate to that. Particularly, I like this quote here. I put a quote up from the Research Methods and Outdoor Studies book, which I really like. And I've chosen not to do something auto-ethnographic. I've gone for this idea that research is through me, not about me. And there's a few other references that I really kind of have held in my mind, where to influence policy, to kind of help, and you know, a range of criteria is needed. And I've chosen for a pragmatist kind of lens, an intersubjective kind of approach, where as an insider, I can kind of understand maybe a bit more of what's going on. I can participate in the activity, I can be there, but it's not about my experience. It's about trying to understand what other people are doing and what they want. So that offers some insight into the perspective. I've done lots of interviews. So I went out and hung out with people and learners. I interviewed them. I hung out with some coaches, watched them work, interviewed them afterwards. And I used a few kind of quantitative tools to, in a couple of ways, which felt pretty useful. And to kind of frame all of my work, I've worked out a definition of adventure. And I think it's absolutely valid that everyone can have a different perspective of adventure. But I think if you want to read and understand the perspective of my work, then it's important to have this out first and say, look, we might all think it's slightly different, but this is the one that I'm going with. You know, we can debate this perhaps today, another time, it doesn't matter when. But to kind of, you know, the risk is that if we all have a different notion of adventure and we don't define what we think we're working at, there's a tendency that we can reinterpret all of our data. So if, you know, 30 people read a piece of work by me, but they come with a different idea of adventure, they'll reinterpret slightly differently than what I've kind of, how I've interpreted it. And in the same way that in qualitative work, we would put down, you know, the researcher's kind of background and present an axiological position, I think my idea of adventure, or the idea of adventure that I've researched from a sample, kind of should be out there as well. You know, so if you're going to read this qualitative work, then it makes sense that we're on the same page, even if we want to debate this bit is, or at least we go forwards with that. So, you know, you can read, and I think the interesting part here is that from this sample of participants, that, you know, motor skill wasn't high on the list. It was about hanging out with people. It was about being in wild places. the idea of being an adventure that wasn't commodified was about having a level of preparedness. You know, I can't just turn up, and there had to be an element of challenge. And that way, you know, in a personalized construction of all those things, in some ways, if I don't think of it as an adventure sport, but the alert participant does because it meets kind of this criteria, that's super valid, and all of a sudden it's adventure in their perspective. I extended the work slightly on that regard to look at what made things more like an independent adventure. And there were three kind of attributes of the individual that were found from those findings. And there is like a base level of confidence to participate. So people going out for an adventure had to feel like there was like a threshold level, you know, which was obviously totally individual, that they were ready to, like, yeah, I am ready to go out without a leader or a coach or an instructor, whether paid or recreational. They had to have ownership over the decision making, and there's lots of research out there already about, you know, participant and passenger and thoughts on that. And then the other one, which I think is slightly, it builds on some previous work, is about if you're independent on your adventure, you have to have some idea of being able to learn on or from the adventure. So because of the novelty of the situation or the newness and the changes in the environment, people felt that they needed to have some idea of, like, each adventure to be on their own. They had to make sense of what's happening, either to adapt in the moment or to be better for the future in many ways. I put quite a confusing slide up here, which I'll explain, obviously. So I did two pieces of this is two chapters here. One was about I investigated a sample of people who were seeking coaching, and I interviewed them while they were seeking adventure sports coaching, and it was a range of activities. And I think this, for tourism, this one is super interesting. I think there's a lot of good stuff here. And I've highlighted the independence part. So in a non-leading way, I wanted to find out, okay, coaches want to teach for independence. I think it's a thing, but do people actually want that from their coaching experience? Which, you know, I think fits easily within the you know, adventure tourism kind of category. And independence was actually quite a small part of it. It was a small part of the developmental experience. And so the authenticity of the experience was about having an actual adventure. You know, if I paid to go on adventure sports coaching or attend a club trip with recreational paddlers, I expect to go and actually do the thing. You know, I want to go kayaking and I want to go somewhere that feels real to me. Equally, about having this coached experience for a week, there was aspects of the social interaction that I wanted. I wanted to go hang out in the pub and see people, chat, go to historical or like cultural places of significance, like Eric's Cafe at Traumatic. And that's part of what I want. I want to be inducted into the culture of my discipline and find out a bit about it. So I kind of did this bit of work, and I'm thinking, oh, crikey, I wanted to investigate what independence is about. And actually, it's not that big a thing, you know, in terms of for a coach delivering what participants want from their experiences, from their coaching courses. They actually want to have a good time. They want to be looked after. They want to have this social, this cultural impact. They want to have an adventure. And then they want to be taught for confidence, the technical bit and the learning bit, and then to be independent. I'm thinking, okay, well, this is actually quite a small bit of the practice. But what was interesting with surveying participants, you know, or learners rather than kind of coaches, obviously their articulation of what they're feeling and what they're thinking isn't particularly great. And in the interviews, they struggled to differentiate between the kind of coaching and the coaches. So I extended the work from there and included a bit of a quantitative tool as well. And there's some interesting methodological stuff that I did there, which I could talk about another time. But essentially what was interesting with talking about what they expected from their coaches was that the need for independence was strong from that. So they wanted the coach to teach them about the environment so they were able to understand where they were going. They wanted the coach to teach them in a manner that was authentic to their idea of adventure. And they wanted to be like explicit development on coaching. So there's loads of commonality with other coaches, like interpersonal skills and all the stuff that we'd expect from traditional sports coaches and you know, providers of adventure tourism, I would have thought too. But it was that the coaching was this kind of fun thing to do, and the coaches was explicitly on independence. So what people want from their coaching is actually quite tricky. And there's this balance of making them independent while having like quite a fun, adventurous kind of time. So the next bit of work was to look at how coaches did this. So I switched perspective from my body of work from learners and participants to kind of high level coaches. I don't know if you can tell, but I work as a teacher and I love whiteboards. So of course this slide is like me freehand drawing some of my thoughts, which I don't know if anyone enjoys, but I certainly enjoyed making. So I was scratching my head thinking, okay, right, this is going to be tricky. I wonder how coaches deal with this. So I investigated coaching practice. I went out for the day. I recorded bits of the session. I interviewed them before. I kept field notes. I went out and interviewed them afterwards to get kind of a real rich data set. And hopefully my idea as an insider gave me some insight into asking the right questions, I hope. And what I found out was that the way that the teaching was working in a kind of a big picture way was that the coaches were taking the students on, or the learners on, an authentic adventure, which ticked the box of what they wanted from their coaching. And that provided the context for the learning. They were able to go out in the mountains or in the boats, do something that felt adventurous to them. And then that kind of almost leads into the next part. And then it was how they're going to learn. So the coaches were developing students specifically on how they might practice, how they might gain feedback with and without the coach, with and without other people. They were teaching them quite explicitly to understand their performance, even if they couldn't do it. So they were kind of almost giving them the nuts and bolts. And then they were also preparing them on where they could practice and learn. And so like the traditional, this kind of idea of coaching about whole part whole, we kind of give the context, break it down, and then we can reconstruct it, kind of fits to a point where we have this idea of what the adventure provides the context. Then we've broken it down into the nuts and bolts, but also how people learn, or how the learners could best learn in that idea. And there's a lot about epistemology in that, about naive to sophisticated epistemology, the nuts and bolts, the comprehension of what to learn, and then where to do it. And then post-coaching, where they gain their independence, students are able to re-put those three pieces together to start producing multiple performances in multiple places and gaining an insight that they're not looking for one solution, like one performance. They're looking for a solution, a valid solution. So it's not like we're looking for a perfect answer to achieve the individual's idea of adventure. There's lots of ways of doing it. The final kind of bit of study that I did here was I went back to the learners who received that coaching.
Yes, 3 minutes left.
Yeah, thank you. To see if there was any measurable impact. So I did some interviews again, and I used a quantitative tool here to measure differences in perceived competency and perceived enjoyment. This is the graph from skills and competency. And it was really, the trend between, so it's 3 sample periods between pre and post, people increased. That kind of makes sense, if the coaching was effective. And then after 3 months, I got them to complete the instrument again, and we can see another increase. And it seems to me that seems reasonable, that the ideas of reconstructing the performance, putting things back together in valid solutions, seems to be working from the learner's perspective. The future directions, I think there's some implications here for how adventure sport coaches are developed in terms of the experience people want from their coaching, how coaches might facilitate that. And that's, I guess, reasonably obvious. But the things that I'm pretty interested in, and there's two things that interest me specifically, is if coaches are teaching people for their idea of adventure, and that we buy into the idea that adventure can be a personalized construct, then actually, if we think about the use of green prescribing and informal activity to improve mental well-being and physical well-being, then trying to encourage more people to participate outdoors or just participate in sport in general, if we can, rather than conforming to the rules of a sport, we buy into the idea that coaches are training people for their notion of participation, then their ownership will improve. They're more independent to participate afterwards. So I think there's an avenue now to pursue here from the skills that adventure sports coaches have that could benefit either in new entrants into adventure sports or more green physical activity. So I think that's a pretty cool new direction. And then this is where my heart lies, is in outdoor and adventure education. And I think the adventure sports coaches are training people how to learn by themselves. and moving from this naive to sophisticated epistemology. They're also teaching them where to practice and how to move along. They're working on their self-efficacy and their self-belief in themselves to participate, and taking ownership over their decisions. And if I kind of want to nail down what my ethos of adventure education here is at school and in my practice, it is essentially those things. And in my mind, they're two sides of the same coin. Adventure sports coaches have got an explicit goal of, maybe adventure, going out and doing something. And implicitly, they need to develop the learnercy, the self-efficacy, and the decision-making. In outdoor and adventure ed, I'm explicitly working on personal development, which could easily be characterized as those three things. And I'm implicitly having to teach technical skills to give the students those experiences to do that, which is a new direction that requires further work.
Brilliant. Oh, that's great. Some fascinating things in there, Chris, and really in terms of the broad applications of it as well, because I suppose, some of us, I guess, are looking at it from an adventure tourism perspective as well. But then, you mentioned, obviously the work in schools and so all levels of sort of learning as well. Did anyone any burning questions while we're here?
Curious about the quantitative. Well done, Chris. That was really, really great. Hand is broken writing notes. The mention of the quantitative tool, mixed methods approach, was it kind of quantitative and qualitative?
Yeah, that's it. So the exploring the attributes of good adventure sports coaches was a validating mixed methods approach. And so I recognize some limitations of internal member checking in interviews. So what I tried to do was I interviewed some people, gained some higher order and mid order themes, and then from the same population but different people, then surveyed them, and I turned those higher order, mid order themes into questions. And then what I ended up doing was, rather than using researcher judgment to determine what of those mid-order themes were the most important attributes of that high-order theme, I used the survey data to inform. They had to rank around these questions what was the most important bit. Okay. So I've tried to use like this hybrid external, internal member checking to do that. The other one was a converging mixed methods approach, where I did interviews of the learners, and then I got them to complete the outdoor recreation self-efficacy scale, which was an established tool. I didn't want to get bogged down into proving a new one. I just wanted to use something, and it seems appropriate. Well, I think it's appropriate, and I've got some justification for that. But essentially, I interviewed them on how their confidence, their decision-making, their learnercy, their technical ability improved. And then I measured this quantitative tool, and then the findings are actually pretty interesting, particularly in terms of the differences in the variables. So there was to 0.01 significance at P, there was an increase between pre and post and pre for the whole sample. And then what was really interesting, I thought, was the differences between mountain and water sports, where water sports gained a greater increase. And my inkling is whether that's to do with the amount of feedback from the water. There's more feedback from the water that you can gain another source of information from than in the mountains, but needs a bit of thought there. And the other one was the difference between when male and females recognized their increase in confidence. So men recognized quite a quick one and it tailed off. The females I sampled, they had quite slow between pre and post, and then went miles up. So 3 months after their coaching, they really increased. And I couldn't find any literature that had sampled the difference between male and female in their perceived ability over that time frame. Someone might know something, but so there was there's some stuff around where it was like maybe after a month or straight away afterwards, and there was this notion that there were differences in that level, but I think it might just be that it takes a longer to be recognized in different samples.
Yeah, that's some fascinating stuff there, Chris. Yeah, particularly, the methods bit was really interesting. I love the way that you've clearly competent across both sides, and you've combined the quants and the quals really, really nicely there. So I'm sure the viva.
Sorry.
No, good stuff. I'm just conscious of the time. I know, Torva, you had a question, but maybe we could hold that. Maybe you haven't got to rush off for a lesson later, have you? Have you, Chris?
Yeah, I can juggle all my balls. Yeah.
Well, so yeah, we'll move on just because I think we'll keep to our time. But if we've got a chance, maybe Tova can come back in, maybe in the break or something. Okay. But thanks for that, Chris. That was great. So
I'll give
sorry.
Yeah, Jason's up next. No. I was going to say I'll give a 5-minute warning. So when you hit 10 minutes, I'll say you have 5 minutes left. So you just need to bear in mind that that's meant to include question time too.
Great. So yeah, next we've got Jason, who's another UCLan representative. We're doing well there, and he's got a fascinating paper, I think, about motorbiking. So I know there's a few of us in the audience who'll be very interested in this one.
So sorry, I had a muting problem there. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, and we've got your.
Cool. So I'm post-transfer and just waiting to undertake some more field work to complete my PhD. But the motorcycle is a vehicle, literally and metaphorically, that provides its rider with the freedom to undertake an intellectual journey through physical travel. And I set this research out to eliminate the life world of the adventure traveler through the study of identity, adventure, and the perception of the world, towards emphasizing the importance of human experience at the heart of the study and qualitative field work undertaken in the form of adventure journeys by motorcycles. And I set off with 3 objectives, and initially these were sort of 3 systematic steps that I was going to take. But as the research goes on, these are 3 components that are simultaneously happening at the same time. So I wanted to engage with published narrative accounts, capture and record stories of lived experience out in the field through ethnographic principles, and then to represent the world of adventure motorcycling using creative methods in representing my data. So starting with the literature, and there is a plethora of literature around motorcycling and adventure travel, starting with Carl Stearns Clancy, who first circumnavigated the world by motorcycle between 1912 and 1913. And this is just a small collection. I went up to recently to lads who travel around the world by scooter and sidecar as well. And there's some really fascinating stories. Bessie Stringfield was the first African-American to travel across America at a time where it was barely safe for her to be a Black woman in her hometown, never mind traveling independently across America. Max Risch did the first overland travel between Vienna and Mumbai, and he was really inspirational in my work. And of course, Ted Simon's Jupiter Travels is a seminal piece of work that a lot of adventurers or travelers have read or come across in their time. I was lucky enough to do some follow-up interviews. That's the very bike that Max Risch traveled from Mumbai to from Vienna to Mumbai. And I was lucky enough to meet his son and go through a lot of the artifacts. And the bike is in the condition as it was when it returned from that trip. That was amazing to see. I've had a number of interviews with Sam Manicum, who's published 4 or 5 books. He's traveled around the world extensively by motorcycle. This is Juniva Hung, who was disgruntled with life, packed her bags, got on a Vespa scooter and left Singapore, and is traveling around the world, breaking up with having to sometimes go back to Singapore to work, but she leaves her bike wherever she makes it. It's currently in the Czech Republic. Tiffany Coates is now acknowledged as the most traveled woman by motorcycle, and the stories that she have are absolutely fascinating. And Nathan Millwood, who moved to Australia, had enough, wanted to come home to England, so got an old postal bike that the Australian Postal Service used and rode it across the world back to London. And part of my PhD has just been inspiring to hear so many great stories of travel. And what came through really early on was this idea of identity. And Sam Manicum, in one of my interviews, summed it up. When something goes wrong, it's seldom a disaster. Usually it's the beginning of an adventure that will stay a highlight in your mind. So embrace it and enjoy where you are taken. As you know already, I'm a bit of a disaster magnet. Things find me to go wrong. And Robin Edison Fulton, who traveled in the 1930s, states really early in his book that the journey was the reason for the motorcycle, not the other way around. So a lot of these people identify as being adventure travelers first and motorcyclists second, and the motorcycle is just a means to carry out the journey. So that led me on to this idea of transformational travel. The idea that we come across all these dilemmas and hazards and problems, and it does more than broaden our minds, it actually transforms us, returning us to home as different people. And a really good example of this is, double click, Che Guevara, who in 1950s traveled through South America by motorcycle. And actually, if you read the book, you can really see him starting to form his ideas around socialism. And he was outraged by the things that he was seeing during this motorcycle travel, and really brought him back transformed. So the idea of the Campbell's hero's journey sort of started to work as a lens to understand some of these experiences, with the idea of leaving the ordinary world, heading out in search of adventure, in search of tests and challenges to bring us back to the ordinary world as different people. So I had this foundation, and I had this sort of lens that I wanted to use. It was time to head out for a bit of ethnographic fieldwork. Now, I'm a motorcyclist, I've been riding a long time. So in my head, I had this great idea of the BMW GS, made famous by Charlie Boorman and Hugh McGregor, traveling around the world on it. You know, it's advertised and marketed as the world's best adventure bike, that it can take you around the world. And I thought, well, if it's that good, where's the adventure? I thought, that's the best bike, what's the worst? And I found it. A cheap 50cc Chinese knockoff motorcycle and an event called the Monkey Run by the Adventurers. And after interviewing them, they kindly sent me out to do some field work. So off I went. I met this group of individuals. It was 2 girls from America, 2 guys from Switzerland, and 2 guys from Australia. And they didn't know each other. They got there, I joined the group, and off we went. And into the field we went, and there were those challenges really early on. The bike started breaking down right from day one, bits falling off, exhaust plates falling off. Some of the people on this trip had never ridden a bike before, so it wasn't long before we started having a lot of problems. Riding through the Sahara Desert, to the borders between Morocco and Algeria, riding through sandstorms. The right place, but on definitely the wrong bike. It was definitely starting to come through as an adventure. Now, I'd gone out there to do ethnographic observations and take notes and working at these narratives in the making. And you can see here that I'm at the back doing my observations and recording the story as we're going along. But soon I couldn't help myself. I was getting pulled in, and my position as someone who has extensively worked in deserts and been on expeditions, I couldn't stay separate from the group. In fact, they were only doing some of the journey because they had me there. And soon I was very much part of the group. And then we came across the old Dakar rally route in Morocco. And then I could really not help myself. And even I had to start playing. In my head, I'm there, Dakar rallying, across the desert. Reality is we're doing about 20 miles an hour, but the experience is very much for me fully embodied. And this is where I found myself early on. I'm trying to resolve conflicts between my identities of researcher and adventure traveler, navigating my way between choices of involvement and immersion, rapport and over-rapport, familiarity and loss of self, reflecting upon my identity in the field. So I have a story. This idea that I've shifted from an observer as participant to complete participant and keeping detailed field notes. And therefore I changed my methodology and I went to an autoethnography and the study of my culture through the self. But I come across this idea of collaborative autoethnography while I'm at the center of the research. The people that I'm journeying with, those other narratives, those interviews are all helping me. So I've moved across to a collaborative autoethnography that, although it's my story, it's heavily informed by everybody else. And they are, as you'll see later on with my data findings, always involved. So I wanted to tell the story of my data, and I wanted to use comics. So Kramer and Clark argue that the issue of comics offers new pedagogical roads, and the graphic novel offers opportunity for far more useful form to present data. And Susan, who actually did his PhD as a graphic novel, argues that the visual verbal work facilitates creative discoveries that would otherwise be obscured. So I had my fieldwork data, field notes, pictures. I turned them into a story using mapping and bringing in my data. I wrote a script, and then I produced my comic. And then to continue the collaborative work, I actually worked with a comic book artist, and we were toing and froing as part of the feedback loop. He would ask questions about the story I'm trying to tell and what I'm trying to portray. I would go back into my data, reflect upon my experience, and come back. So over a period of time, my rough notes and script slowly turned into a graphic novel. And then during my transfer, my transfer report consisted of a 5-page comic, which was heavily influenced by data. And there's quite a lot of visual autoethnography going on there. So it all added in. I also worked with an artist to start to explore some of these multiple identities that I have while in the field. And we did this through the idea of using comic book covers. So I produced the adventure variant, the researcher variant, the expedition variant. And actually, if you look at these comic book covers, there's a lot of symbolism, there's semantics, there's a lot of metaphor in there. For example, the building and the researcher is the university building at UCLan to represent tradition. I'm wearing a riding crop suit there to represent tradition, where if you look at the relationship between me and the bike in the adventure variant, there is no relationship. It's just a bike given to me for journeying. And these different versions of me and who I am during the travel. And it came me to this: adventure travel is a lot about seeking out the other. This sort of symbol here is me in the center of my own culture, leaving that and heading out in search for adventure of the other. But it really did not capture the experience that was going on. It didn't really sum up. So I was looking for other things. And what I was looking for is an internal journey as much as an external journey, and looking for the ideal me, looking for the most sacred place for me. So not leaving the most sacred place of home, but searching out. So it was more like a pilgrimage. When you're on the bike, it isn't much about the place, it's about the journey. So actually, there isn't such a place, because the road or the trail is the location, it is where you're seeking out. And it's this liminal space that provides opportunity for change and transformational experiences to happen. So really, the destination is liminality, is the road, and it's a pilgrimage for the road. And it's not even a single road, it's a wandering pilgrimage. And wandering pilgrimages come out in Japanese literature, and actually even in Icelandic and Nordic literature, where chieftains would go out and wander around their villages to find out what was going on in pilgrimages. So that leads me back at a time to undertake international travel when international travel is challenging, but we're packed, we're heading out in April for a 30-day journey by motorcycle on off-road trails from here to Greece. And that's the next stage before I do the final write-up. And that's me.
Brilliant. Another fascinating and wonderfully presented. I love that, the graphic novel bit. That's a really interesting methodology that you've got there, that to really sort of bring those elements, I suppose, of the trips out. And looking forward to the next trip. Is that involved this Trans-European Trail? Have you come across that?
So that's what we're doing. We're using the Trans-European Trail as the base route, but understanding that the time of year that we're traveling, some of the mountain passes will be closed. I've done the Trans-European Trail in England and Wales, so now we're using that. But there are areas that I want to go and explore, and because of the narrative, I want to sort of go into some of the places that have more of a narrative story to them, not necessarily just the Trans-European Trail. And that's part of this wandering pilgrimage. It's not following a specific route, but it's heading out.
Yeah, true adventure. Good. Did anyone have any quick questions for Jason?
Just a quick comment, not about, I'm interested in motorcycling myself. I've just bought an XT 700 actually, Jason. But I was interested in the whole idea of the imaginary of the hero, and those different selves that you portrayed, that kind of associated with motorcycle brands and their histories and so on. And I thought that I scribbled down before you put the next slide up, seeking out your imagined other self. So rather than seeking out the other, the exoticized other, which we often talk about in tourism, you're kind of seeking out your imagined other self, whether you're Lawrence of Arabia or what's the guy from Papillon? The Great Escape, him. Anyway, all these different sort of heroic figures that appear within the motorcycle imagery, and I'd be interested, of course, to hear more about the liminal aspects to those journeys. Whether it's mending and making do, or just it's that thing, isn't it? Whenever on a journey you're forced to sit at the roadside somewhere that you've probably no place in being, but actually it's tremendously existentially relaxing in a strange sort of way. I'll leave it there anyway.
It's my actual thesis will be 6 20-page comics telling the story of the research, and I'm actually going to write and publish them in a short run, and then use feedback from people reading those comics, sort of a versatility check for does it sound truthful. And actually, the idea for those comics is there's going to be 3 gentlemen on a motorbike journey, and actually 3 of them are me, but 3 different aspects of me. So how those different identities interact with each other, and which ones come to the forefront at which times.
Brilliant. Sounds good. Well, I look forward to seeing them if they get in wider circulation. Good stuff. Let's move on. But you know, again, if we've got some time again, we can come back to some of these discussions, because there's certainly fertile ground there. So next, I think we've got Harriet. Have we still got Harriet? Yeah. So yeah. Harriet is a student at Sheffield Hallam, and I think she works with Adele at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah. Adele's my director of studies.
So yeah, really looking forward to hearing about less powered 2 wheels in this presentation.
Yeah. We get my screen share on. Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel a bit disappointed that I haven't got anything as exciting as a comic book. But yeah, no. Is that sharing okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Great.
Thanks,
Okay. So morning, everyone. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for a really interesting presentation. I'm going to talk today about my research in cycling tourism and well-being. So here's a bit of a brief overview of what I'm going to cover today. So I'll talk about where my interest in the research came from, and then the definition of well-being and the theories I used to examine well-being. I'll then talk about the group I've examined in my research specifically, so cycling tourists, and explain my data collection and analysis methods. And finally, I'll talk about some initial findings and hopefully my potential contribution. So why cycling tourism and well-being? So I was brought up from an early age riding a bike, and I feel very grateful to have had cycling as a sport I can do to keep fit, to socialise, and just to get around as well. I spent a period of my life working as an active travel officer, so I was teaching children to cycle and seeing the benefits it had on their lives. By being lucky enough to spend lots of adventurous holidays throughout my life with cycling as the main purpose of the trip, I recognised that participating in sporty and adventurous holidays really enhanced my well-being. And with depression noted by the World Health Organization as the greatest source of global ill health in 2020, it's a really important time to research how cycling tourism can help to improve not only physical but mental health and well-being as well. So well-being, as some of you might know, is notoriously quite a difficult concept to define. And Decky and Ryan's seminal definition that I've put up on the slide has been adopted by the majority of wellbeing studies, including my own. The latter half of the 20th century saw this kind of movement of scholarly interest in wellbeing, which was deemed the positive psychology movement of the 90s. And that sort of involved a group of really respected researchers shifting their focus from pathology to a science of understanding about how individuals can experience happiness and enable flourishing. Tourism studies have shown quite a growing interest in the relationship between well-being and tourism, particularly through positive psychology theory. Well-being has also emerged to dominate national health agendas, and internationally and nationally, and is established alongside physical health as goal 3 of the UN Development Goals. In the COVID-19 pandemic, well-being issues have been thrown into sharp relief, so making it really appropriate timing to examine how active and adventurous forms of tourism can influence an individual's happiness. So well-being is constituted from 2 essentially distinct yet interconnected philosophies, so hedonia and eudaimonia, which you might have heard those terms before. Scholars have kind of actively debated the intricate symbiotic relationship between hedonic and eudaimonic well-being. And despite multiple theories coming through, most of the researchers in the social sciences now agree that hedonia and eudaimonia are interlinked complementary psychological functions. Hedonic well-being focuses on contentment and pain avoidance and is understood by positive psychologists as subjective happiness and the pursuit of pleasures which require instant well-being. And contrastingly, eudaimonic well-being is associated with self-realization and pursuit of long-term prosperity through the undertaking of meaningful actions. In a tourism context, hedonia relates to individuals on holiday in high spirits, receiving that immediate happiness and pleasure-seeking activities, which is really fun and doesn't kind of focus on a longer-term benefit. So in the context of cycling tourists, this could be like the rush of positive emotions that you gain when freewheeling fast down a hill. Forms of tourism that enable eudaimonic well-being could include adventurous activities, which involve the tourist fulfilling a lifelong ambition, undertaking, activities that aren't immediately pleasant in the moment, but they provide that longer-term meaning. Within cycling, adventure cycling tourism, this might involve going through a tough experience of ascending a really long or tricky steep climb, which in the moment doesn't feel necessarily great, but the eudaimonic benefits to well-being lie in reaching the top of that hill, and the sense of achievement or improved confidence might only present itself at a later point. So there's lots of theories that exist, like I said, to examine well-being. I've selected 2 theories to examine hedonic and eudaimonic well-being of cycling tourists in my study. And I chose these theories because they're prominently employed in academic and political spheres. So firstly, subjective well-being, you can see at the top, describes the overall quality of a person's life according to their individual subjective assessment. The tripartite model that's put out there considers affect, so positive and negative affect, and life satisfaction. This affective dimension deals with the encounter of pleasure versus displeasure and covers immediate emotions experienced. So for cycling tourists, like I mentioned, feeling happy, maybe even reaching a cafe, enjoying a cake, that would be positive affect. And although life satisfaction is one of the arms on that model, which aims to capture eudaimonia, myself and other researchers have critiqued this, and I'll instead use self-determination, the theory below, to capture eudaimonia. So just to move on and briefly talk about self-determination theory, it's concerned with the motivation of behaviours and suggests that an individual's basic psychological needs for autonomy, competence and relatedness are the foundations to positive growth and eudaimonic well-being. Autonomy is that ability to make independent decisions and take ownership of one's actions. Competence involves feeling confident about undertaking activities and striving to attain goals. And relatedness is a sense of belonging, experiencing, social interaction and connectedness with others. So again, those experiences in the moment aren't necessarily pleasurable, could stimulate self-development and enhance eudaimonic well-being. So to give some background on the group that I'm examining, so cycling tourists, various definitions for cycling tourism do exist, but I've adopted Lamont's seminal definition that's again up on the slide. But for me, the fundamental characteristic of cycling tourism is that riding a bike must play a really integral role in a trip away from an individual's home. Cycling tourism has grown globally in popularity, as you can see from the images on the slide. Multiple variations of cycling tourism do exist. So I'm going to look, I have looked specifically at cycling tourists who pay to undertake an organised group holiday with a tour operator who kind of arranges the routes, luggage transportation, accommodation and food for them. Because despite the relative growth in cycling tourism, it actually is quite an under-researched area. The form of cycling tourism that I'm researching falls within the field of soft adventure tourism. Travel is relatively safe to the areas that these cycling tourists are going, and it doesn't require a particularly high skill level, so it isn't like really technical mountain biking, and therefore it's soft adventure. So drawing on some theories highlighted in the literature, I developed a conceptual framework which guided my data collection. And this model is currently in the stage of development for my data analysis. But simplistically, you can see that from the bottom, motivations experienced by a cycling tourist lead upwards with arrows to improve their hedonic and eudaimonic well-being, which in turn causes satisfaction and remotivates an individual to participate in cycling tourism. The key tenets of my model obviously are hedonia and eudaimonia, and the literature review made clear that interconnected nature. But the arrows between the model do represent this, but the dotted line, the dotted arrow from eudaimonia to hedonia kind of indicates the query surrounding that causal link, which is what my research hopes to understand a bit better. So for my methodology, I wanted to undertake a qualitative study because my research then could move beyond pragmatic measures to provide rich stories and put more focus on the lived experience of the cycling tourists. And I felt this would really offer that kind of deeper understanding of their experiences and therefore well-being. The participants comprised individuals that had participated in an organised cycling trip, obviously, and I accessed them via a tour operator called Peak Tours, who were quite local to my area, and were really friendly and agreed to send out a recruitment blurb to their kind of previous and current clients in their newsletter email. I was originally planning to undertake an ethnographic study and participate in an organised trip myself, but this was all kicking off when COVID happened. So I was going to conduct mobile interviews, but unfortunately the restrictions around COVID and the university made it impossible. So instead I conducted 40 online in-depth semi-structured interviews. The semi-structured interview format helped keep the interviews really informal, so I could kind of build good rapport with the participants, just chat to them a lot actually about their interest of cycling and talking about their past experiences. So it was a really nice conversation to have, and I think that encouraged them to speak a bit more openly and kind of tell me some of those stories that they had. I also tried using a photo elicitation component, so to capture the participants' hedonic experiences, I got them to bring a photo from their trip and talk about the emotions that they felt in that moment. Braun and Clark's 6-step process for undertaking thematic analysis guided me in identifying, analysing and recording themes in the data set, and I used Max QDA to support the coding process. So it's pretty impossible to refine my research findings into one slide. I'm currently in that stage where I'm writing them all up and my head's in a bit of a mad place, as I'm sure Adele will probably be nodding and know. But I'll give you a brief overview of a couple of findings that have emerged. I had 3 key themes, which were self-efficacy, social identity and emplacement. But yeah, first, really, hedonic and eudaimonic well-being of cyclists. It emerged from the findings that it's really intricately connected. So for instance, the negative emotions experienced on a steep climb were those hedonic experiences that then stimulated the cycling tourist's confidence and self-efficacy to improve later after successfully completing the climb, which enabled a sense of achievement and eudaimonia. Second, the cycling tourists, they didn't really identify themselves as tourists, but instead as cyclists. And by successfully ascending well-known climbs that some of you might have heard of, like Alpe d'Huez or Mont Ventoux, the cycling tourists reaffirmed their social identity as cyclists. And that sense of belonging related to satisfies the relatedness aspect and of eudaimonic well-being. It further became clear that physical fitness and challenge of the trip were a great motivator for the participants, which helped increase their competence. And finally, the embodied sensory experiences of the participants allowed them to feel freedom and escapism, which in turn provided them that mind space for autonomous reflection and development. So a lot of participants did return from the trip with kind of altered perspectives on aspects of their life. Hopefully my research will contribute to knowledge about hedonia and eudaimonia of cycling tourists and the relationship between those 2 tenets of well-being. And the findings will eventually lead to the development of a final theoretical framework, which could provide interdisciplinary insights and hopefully will be transferable to both recreational, adventure and tourism contexts to understand well-being a bit better, which kind of forms a key contribution of my research. But beyond purely academic contributions, disseminating the findings of my study within the cycling tourism industry, through attending meetings and conferences, it could provide a practical contribution which might improve tour operator knowledge in enhancing the well-being of their clients on trips and provide economic benefits and growths in a form of tourism which positively contributes to physical and mental health. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. If you've got any further questions or about my slides, about my project, then don't hesitate to get in touch. I've added a list of references at the end. Thank you very much for listening. And I hope today maybe inspires some of you to get out on your bikes and improve your well-being.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harriet. I love that whole, the whole approach, I suppose, of bringing in, a much more holistic model of well-being and its application there. I think that's really, really useful. I can see Tova's got her hand up and she's been waiting eagerly.
Yeah, I thought it was a fun study to hear about, and I just wanted to come back to something that you said, and then you sort of let it go, and I'd like to come back to it. And that was, you said that you used photo elicitation. Yeah. You said, and what you said, something like, I tried photo elicitation, and I didn't know what that meant. Like, did that mean that you didn't get the data you had anticipated, or what kind of data did you get from that? I'm curious.
Yes, thank you for your question. So I think that I probably brushed over it because I was a bit kind of but actually I think the photo I did do a photo elicitation component with every participant, and I asked them to bring a couple of photos, and it was good because it helped them to re-jog their memory, and I think that was the most positive point from it. It helped them to remember, and it also got them prepared for the interview in a way that I don't think they would have. So a lot of the participants mentioned, oh, by having to go back through, I've kind of relived a bit of that trip. I think for me that I still, like, as a researcher, I still feel quite a lot of disappointment because of COVID that I didn't get to be on that trip, because to capture that hedonic experience and to aim to do that through a photo elicitation component, I think I will write in my methodology that it doesn't fully capture hedonia, and I think it fails to. And I think that anyone who's trying to subsequently capture an immediate, in the moment emotion probably knows that it's impossible. But I think it was a nice addition to the interviews, and like I say, it definitely rejogged the memory of the participants and it helped them think about a special moment. But I think that ideally, to capture hedonia better, I would need to be doing that mobile ethnographic study. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, but of course it inspired another one. May I ask another question?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you said here, this is a constant discussion, but this idea of capturing the moment, that's when it really happens versus people's memories of it. But actually, the moment is really fleeting, and our memory of it is what we carry with us the rest of our lives. So I would just like for you to think about that when you write that method section, that it's not like what you're catching now is less real. As a matter of fact, it's super real. That's real for us right now. That's as real as it gets. I supervised also a PhD student who was looking at the experience of the hedonic and the eudaimonic experience of skiing, backcountry skiing. We had to catch people while they were flying down the mountains, and in the end, because he was really committed to catching that moment. But really, what people, it's the memory of the current memory that is aroused, right? That is really the experience that you live with. So think about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. I'm aware that we did have a break in the program, but I'm loving the way that we've got a nice little collegiate atmosphere going on. So can I suggest that if people just want to stretch, because there's so many good ideas going around, sometimes I find my head gets so full of ideas, I just need 5 minutes to kind of take a break. So if anyone wants to duck out and just have a quick toilet break or a coffee break, please do. There's we won't feel bad about it, but let's keep the discussion going. I can see another hand's gone up, and let's just use this as a friendly, social, small space for carrying on chatting. Does that sound like a plan? And it's good to see as well, we've got Thomas now. Thomas has been struggling to get in. So Pete, was that a question you got for Harriet that you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, it was just to underline what Tova said about the nature of reality. But the other thing was, Harriet, to celebrate your response to that question, because I think if that was in a viva voce, that was a very good way of putting it. What you've got is a photo, which is literally a snapshot, but a moment in time, and which is also two-dimensional or whatever. And the way that you explained why that didn't quite work for you, but you used it as a stimulus, is really smart. So well done. And I think the other aspect of this, though, is that a snapshot in time. The point that Tove was making is that reality is fluid, isn't it? I suppose at the top of a bike run, you're anticipating it, or even before the holiday, you know, you're thinking about it. So there's all that anticipation and research and whatever. There's also the, you know, from the tourism literature, there's all the authenticity bit where part of it's co-created, part of it's within you, and then there's all that stuff, the reflection and the remembering. And in my case with skiing, you know, it's lying there remembering it on your hospital bed for a while. So, but it's a whole linear process anyway, and then telling stories after it. So yeah, really nice work.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, no, and I think as well, just from what I've just been thinking over in the last 2 minutes as well, I think about my own experiences as well, which I guess we all do when we're researching. We draw it back to ourselves a little bit, and I know that when I need to cheer myself up and remember, like, God, that was a great trip I did with my mates on bikes, I can look at a photo and it brings up those positive emotions that I felt in that picture. So I guess that, you know, it does have, and I think perhaps one of the other discussion points, but we're going off on a tangent here, is to say maybe you never take photos at the bad points, so actually capturing that negative affect is even more difficult. But anyway, yeah, thank you very much for your comments.
Ashley, was there something?
Well, just a general comment to begin with. The standard of presentations is astonishing. The way people are sticking to time, the handling of questions. Jason's use of PowerPoint was incredible. Chris, your first slide blew my mind, because I've never really thought about what other people think I'm doing and what my boss thinks I'm doing. Harriet, you know, just really, really tight in your presentation with everything you would expect for a PhD student to be presenting. I'm just going to follow the theme, and the reason for this, I guess, is because my memory's a bit like a goldfish. I wish I was as eloquent as everybody here. You know, notwithstanding PhD journey, I don't think I've ever been as eloquent as you guys. It's absolutely great to hear. But Harriet, what I'm interested in is when these photographs come in, when these images come in, Harriet's shoulders are slumped again. Photographs again. Are they eudaimonic photographs, or are they hedonistic photographs? You know, are they sort of capturing incredible moments, or are they reflective in terms of how those moments made people feel?
Yeah, I think I'd actually, I think that I would like critique my own use of photo elicitation, because by employing photo elicitation in order to aim to capture the hedonic, it's fundamentally flawed, because you're already not in that moment, because you're already looking back. But then you could try and argue that the only way to capture a moment is a photograph. But yeah, I think that also what your question goes back to, and is something that I'd like to think that I can better explain when I'm bringing out my findings in a bit more of a succinct way, is that hedonia and eudaimonia are inextricably linked. And actually your previous experiences contribute towards your in the moment reactions and emotions and affect. And also that in the moment reaction, emotion and affect then contributes into how you feel longer term. So yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered, but I think that what this discussion has actually given me is a very different view about perhaps some reflective stuff to write in my methodology and in my thesis, and about the photo elicitation component, because I think that actually before I've not given it enough time and energy, and I've really had it as this add-on that I've kind of been like, oh, like, you know, capture hedonia, kind of just chuck the photo elicitation in, but actually to kind of to give a little bit more, a bit more scrutiny to it maybe, and kind of give it a bit more time would be good. Yeah, we're back to Tova's conundrum, aren't we? That she threw out right at the on the second question. And I've just mentioned in the chat, Harriet, if you want to get in touch with a guy called Andy Cunningham. He's currently doing an MRes at Leeds Beckett, and he's looking specifically at eudaimonia. It might be an interesting 40-minute discussion on a Wednesday morning or something. So bear that in mind. Email me if you want. That sounds really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I'll have a look. I haven't looked at the chat yet, but I'll have a look now. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ashley. And we always love your very eloquent interjections. So, but I would echo actually, Ashley's point as well about the presentations we've had so far this morning being fantastic and really, really professionally put across. Just conscious of time and making sure that everyone gets a good go. Really pleased that Thomas has finally managed to join us. I know you had real struggle getting in, Thomas. We haven't had a chance to check your presentation yet, but did you want to have a go at lining that one up? So on the share screen. So Thomas is joining us from Greece, is that right?
Welcome, Thomas. I'm pleased you're able to get on.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but finally I did it, and I'm very happy for that.
Good, brilliant.
Would you see my presentation?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Okay, great. Very nice. Can I start or?
Yeah, please do start.
Okay.
And Carl's going to say when you've reached 10 minutes, so then you know you have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So I'm Thomas, based in Greece. I work as an associate researcher in the Laboratory of Sport, Tourism and Recreation Management, which is directed from Dr. Kostas Alexandris in Greece. My presentation called The Role of Brand Associations on the Development of Hiking Involvement. It is a case study for Mount Olympus in Greece. The purpose of the study was to explore the influence of such brand associations on the development of hiking involvement levels of hikers during a hike on Mount Olympus. The context of the study is about experiences on the mountain. Mount Olympus is the first national park of Greece and the highest mountain, with 120,000 visitors annually. There are plenty of opportunities and challenges there for hiking, big verticals for climbing, deep canyons, and long, of course, mountain biking trails, and of course, steep slopes for backcountry ski. It is the busiest mountain during the summer season in Greece. That's why there are 4 well-organized mountain huts to visit on Olympus. So the first part of the literature review is about brand associations, which are thoughts that a consumer makes considering a brand. This concept is related to positive marketing outcomes such as awareness or better positioning of the brand. And brand association concept has been tested mainly in sport leagues and fitness industry, in our case, of course, also in business industry. To our knowledge, there is no evidence, To our knowledge, there is no evidence of brand associations related on adventure tourism destinations and activity involvement. And finally, Keller classified brand associations into 3 dimensions: attributes, which are the specific characteristics of the product, and defined it into tangible characteristics, in our case, the trails of Mount Olympus, and to non-tangible characteristics, for example, the brand or the stories, in our case, the myths and the mythology of Mount Olympus in Greece. The second category are benefits, which are the consumer's expectations related to the value of using the product. For example, the escape of the daily routine when we are hiking, it's a benefit for us. And the last category, attitudes, which are the beliefs for the brand. And the general attitudes toward Mount Olympus. That's why we adopt brand association concept as a relevant to our study, which capture best our purpose. The second part of literature review is about activity involvement, which described as a psychological commitment with different levels and based on motivation, interest toward an object, for example, a sport or a leisure activity. Involvement with an activity may lead to positive outcomes, such as empower of subjective well-being or loyalty, and remain one of the most well-documented frameworks in sport and leisure settings. The most acceptable model to measure activity involvement proposed a long time ago from McIndoe and Pigram with 3 subscales. Attraction refers to how an activity or generally an object looks attractive and create exciting atmosphere. Second subscale is centrality. If this object, if this activity plays a central role for the person. And third category, self-expression, how this activity, how an individual can express him or herself through the activity.
Thomas, your slides aren't moving forward. We're just looking at your main screen, I think. But I don't know. Yeah. We can see your screen, but we're just looking at the first slide. I don't know if you're moving forward through the slides, but yeah.
Sorry. Let me check it again, but
yeah, that's forward. Yeah.
Now is it?
We've got the research question number 1. Is that
okay? But do you see the significance of the study? The slide of significance of the study?
No.
I think that's the next one, is it?
See the one with the mountain on it.
Research question 1.
Okay, let me please maybe like this. Can you see now the presentation sliding down with this way, not full screen?
Yeah.
Maybe that way it's better now. I don't know what happened today. Sorry. Okay, the slide for the research question. Do brand associations contribute on the development of hiking involvement on Mount Olympus? The significance of the study lies on 3 points. First, the theoretical concept is not tested yet. And second, treated activity involvement as an outcome. It's not the strongest one, but mainly activity involvement studied as an independent variable. And third, the application of brand association concept onto adventure tourism settings. About the methodology, the questionnaires were distributed among the 4 mountain huts during the summer season, about 1 month. The total sample consisted from 342 hikers. The vast majority were males and singles with an average age of 34.5 years old. Also, they hold a higher education degree or a master, and they prefer to hike with friends and then usually hike with an alpine club and or alone. Also, they spent 1 or 2 nights on mountain huts. A multi-scale questionnaire was used to measure the hypothesized model, branch associations captured by 8 subscales: popularity, escape, vicarious achievement, affect, importance, social interaction, nostalgia, and pride, and activity, involvement, as I explained before, attraction, centrality, and self-expression. For the data analysis, we used AMOS to test the goodness of fit indicators for the measurement model, and SPSS to test the regression models. About the measurement model, the confirmatory factor analysis showed that the measurement model had acceptable model fit. As you can observe, all the indicators are in acceptable scores. And in terms of reliability, the composite reliability indicator had acceptable ranges, also for Cronbach's alpha value. In terms of convergent validity, we can claim that it was established due to all significant T values and the average variance extracted indicator, which was above the 0.50 cutoff criterion. The same for discriminant validity, since all correlations were less than 0.85 threshold, and according to Fornell and Lacker's approach, all the square roots of average variance extracted construct should exceed the correlations among the variables. And these are the evidence. Sorry about the blur thing. It was a huge measurement model for me. Of course, I can provide every details if someone needs further guidelines for this. These are the loadings, T values, the average mean, Cronbach's alpha, composite reliability, and AVE, and the correlation matrix with on the diagonal axis in bold the square roots of AVE. About the regression models, the first model with the attraction faced as a dependent variable, popularity, escape, vicarious achievement, affect, and social interaction contributed. The most impactful subscale, subscale, it was vicarious achievement, and then followed by social interaction and popularity. Regarding the second dependent variable, centrality, popularity again, escape, vicarious achievement, affect, and importance impacted the centrality dimension. And last, regression model with the self-expression as dependent variable, only popularity, importance, social interaction, and pride contributed the most on the development. About the discussion section, generally the results confirm the important role of branch associations on the development of hiking involvement. We can claim that the results positively answer our research question. Strong branch associations may contribute directly to perceived cognitive and affective elements of visitors, and we saw that the prediction of attraction, the vast majority were attributes, mainly attributes, of course, cognitive elements, except the affect dimension. We saw that popularity, escape for the daily routine, and the sense of achievement contributed on the attraction level. About the centrality, attributes and benefits contributed cognitive and affective elements of the branch associations, such as popularity, escape, and now affect and importance. Remember, importance was the most impactful dimension for this. And last, the self-expression, benefits again, and attitudes, cognitive and affective elements. popularity, importance, pride now, and social interaction. We saw also that the popularity dimension of the destination, it was a key association to empower activity involvement level. And last point for me, it was that this finding showed that there are different patterns of associations among the participants with different involvement levels. About the managerial implications, two important things, that strong brand destinations such as Olympus, which is an adventure destination, should develop different promotional strategies to create several brand association patterns according to the activity involvement level. And second, marketers and managers of an adventure destination should brand their tourist destinations through cognitive and affective elements combined, of course. And last slide about the future research. I think that we need to include more adventure destinations combined with the brand association models and more attitudinal and behavioral variables for a better understanding of hiking behavior. And I think the next step for me is to maybe to classify participants according to different involvement levels, and then we to test another model to the results to be more insightful. You know, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Apologies. I was just sending a quick message to Joe because Joe's got a few signal problems. Thank you very, very much. That was really interesting and really fascinating to hear about another geographical perspective. So thank you for joining us, because I know it's been quite a mission for you this morning, and a different methodology. So that was really interesting. Has anyone got any? Oh, Ashley, you've got a question.
Yeah, I just think future studies, Thomas, you've sort of hit the nail on the head, really, in that there's lots of different users out there doing different things, and they'll all have very different motivations, I'm guessing. You know, obviously, even within the same activity, you know, my PhD considered different modes of climbing and how different those modes of climbing were for the participants. So actually trying to identify those different user groups, I think, would be absolutely key to moving this work forward. But I really enjoyed that. It's great, as Adele said, great seeing a completely different perspective on a geographical area that, you know, I don't know anything about. So I've learned loads this morning. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the comments.
I was wondering whether we should get Joe on if he's got a bus to catch.
I was just thinking that, Tony, is it okay if you ask Thomas a question in a moment once we've, thank you very much, because I've got a question for you as well, Thomas. So but I'm hoping there'll be time at the end for us to ask some more questions. Okay, Joe, you have got a bus to catch and you've got dodgy internet connection. So let's give this a go and hope it all comes together.
Sounds like that phrase from earlier, was it? Caught in trouble.
Oh, trouble comes to me. We can see your slides.
So you can't hear you, Joe. You're muted, I think, Joe.
We can see your slides, Joe. We just can't hear you.
I think you've just got the Zoom mute on.
So. Yeah, on mute. Yeah, that's it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Sorry about that. Very sorry I didn't provide a conceptual framework or a comic. I really like the idea of that comic, but I have plenty of images and I do have a video at the end. So let me introduce. I'm going to switch off my video because it does seem to be drawing the power. But let me introduce you to a group of people that I believe hold the secret related to general quality of life and health-related quality of life throughout our adventure. My background is leisure management and sports science. I'm a member of the Faculty of Tourism, Hospitality and Leisure at the Technical University of the Shannon Midlands, Midwest, recently appointed as a technical university. I'm a keen outdoor adventure activity enthusiast with a fundamental belief that inclusive and appropriately adapted outdoor adventure activity can contribute to successful aging and ultimately public health. And over the last 5 years, I set out on a PhD adventure part-time to understand the motivations, perceived and real benefits of outdoor adventure activities of sea swimming, scuba diving, which is my passion, and my other passion, which is hill walking for older adventurers. The images in this presentation of the older adventurers that I met along the way, demonstrating a broad range of abilities and interests, but all determined to continue with the adventure. None of them are super agers, and they all embrace their respective activities. I've been privileged, humbled, and educated by the people I met over the last 5 years. And at the time of writing, I had conducted semi-structured interviews on a conversational basis with 27 interviewees. So, as the slide would indicate, I'll describe my PhD journey. I started 4 years ago with a plan, and at the end, hey presto, with PhD in the bag. Great idea, but as with all journeys in life, the reality was somewhat different, and the journey looked a little bit more like this. So I'm somewhere along that line, and I'm struggling, and I'm really enjoying this webinar or this meeting, this Zoom call, because I'm getting lots of great information. And I blame you guys on me starting the PhD in the first place, because I was at a conference you're all speaking at today, and that's what drove me to it. So why do it apart from the ATRA influence? Over many years of adventure, I observed an aging profile of people. Engaging in various adventure activities is a good thing. However, from my work with senior citizens and older adults, I was also aware of many more people that got to the age of 50 and decided to stop engaging, adapting a more sedentary lifestyle. And I believe it's the way physical activity was promoted to them. Unfortunately, the research bears this out. People become less physically active as they age, and this is the time when they should be increasing engagement in physical activity, maybe modified or adapted physical activity, but they should be increasing engagement. So I wondered if outdoor adventure activity might be part of the solution to promoting physical activity to older people. And the research is irrefutable. Exercise is good for you, and increasingly the research demonstrates that outdoor physical activity is even better for you. Outdoors, people are likely to engage in more social, educational, stimulating activity and for longer. The fitness experts amongst you will be familiar with the FIT principle, or maybe not, of frequency, intensity, time and type with regard to exercise prescription. And outdoors, these can be adjusted based on one's abilities, terrain, or simply how you're feeling on the day. However, outdoors, it is never boring. There is always something to see or someone to talk about and opportunities to learn. So a lot of the adventures I went on. So I'll just move on. So there's a gap in the research regarding understanding the motivations of older outdoor adventurers. There are some papers, quite a few papers, but particularly in the Irish context. So if you like exploring the community of older adventurers through observation and participation, understanding the motivations and the benefits of those that do participate regarding the social, the physical, the mental benefits will contribute to the body of knowledge. Dissemination of this information will contribute to normalization of outdoor adventure activity for older participants, perhaps reducing the negativity that often prevails around aging and the abilities of older people. The concept of attraction rather than promotion, or the idea that if you can't see it, you can't be it, comes to mind. So number of underlying theories, and they've been mentioned in dispatches with the exception of selective optimization with compensation today. The ones that I want to highlight are selective optimization with compensation, self-determination and self-efficacy. And based on my research to date, and I'm at the initial stages of analysis of 27 interviews, there are clear links to be seen in the context of older outdoor adventures impacting motivation and ultimately participation. And I just pulled a couple of examples out. I need to do further analysis on this. For example, goals and interests are impacted by vicarious experience. If you can't see it, you can't be it, just to repeat that statement. This impacts on autonomy and decision making. There's a relationship between the creativity on the part of the provider or the facilitator the potential participant, and the efforts to encourage participation. And I think it's important that we recognise and facilitate in outdoor adventure the broad range of abilities and interests that exist amongst older people in general, and demonstrate the interests of older outdoor adventurers. So the link is there to be seen. So in the context of exploring the motivations of older outdoor adventurers and to understand why, what, how, where, and when, a qualitative methodology was necessary and underpinned by an interpretivist philosophy was applied. To fully experience the environment, an ethnographic approach to participation and observation was used over the last 2 years, although I did do some initial research 4 years ago. And I've engaged with the participants on at least 3 adventures in their respective activities of scuba diving, sea swimming, and hill walking. A really tough job, but somebody had to do it. So with the exception of the cold water sea swims, and you'll notice in all the pictures of the cold water sea swims, I'm wearing a wetsuit. The guys in 86 and 87 aren't, and swimming further and sometimes faster than me. And I was a former competitive swimmer. So a tough job, but somebody had, so where am I going? This provided an opportunity to experience and observe what the participants would describe in subsequent interviews. So an in-depth interview framework was used to direct the questioning and to ensure consistency. And it was developed based on the literature, experience, and aspects of the recreation experience preference domains. And the questions were open-ended and designed to elicit the views of the interviewers through a conversational approach. And the thematic analysis I'm using is Braun and Clark's. So my research journey commenced in December 2017, and I had a simple idea at the time that outdoor adventure activities held possibilities. I had 7 years experience working with older adults providing activities, and the health services executives here would often have a heart attack when I told them I was bringing them out on the mountains. And the average age was 74, and they had no problems being on the mountains or on the hills. So for engaging older people in sustainable levels of physical activity to enhance health, well-being, and quality of life. So after over 4 years of observations, engagement, and research, I'm even more convinced. However, I now believe that there are more benefits to facilitation and promotion of older adults and outdoor adventure activities. And I suggest that the World Health Organization's Decade of Healthy Aging strands of functional ability, intrinsic capacity, and environments may well be addressed through inclusive, fun facilities and facilitation of active aging through outdoor adventure. And I draw your attention to the slide and the main suggested within each pillar. I've no intention to read from it, but I will, based on my observations to date and analysis, an initial round of analysis on my data. Through observation and the in-depth interviews, I've seen older adventurers extrinsically and intrinsically motivated through engaging with like-minded people. Those that start out being extrinsically motivated by other people coaching to come along ultimately end up being intrinsically motivated. They build relationships, they value the activity, they sustain functional ability, and are valued contributors and participants in the groups, all really important. The opportunity to learn is ever present, contributing to mental capacity, energy, and balance. Participants all support the positive impact of their physical, mental, and social health. The contribution to wellness and well-being to their participation with like-minded people in their chosen activity is positively palpable. All participants engage in positive and a beneficial way with their environments. There's a connection with the natural environment and an appreciation of the opportunity to engage in these environments for as long as their functional ability permits. That's what they've all told me. Their attitude and outlook is positive. Fundamentally, I believe that appropriately facilitated outdoor adventure activities made accessible through well-appointed facilities and delivered in a fun and inclusive way will go a long way to contributing to the pillars proposed in the Decade of Healthy Aging's baseline report. We need to just demonstrate the possibilities. Of course, we need to recognize fears. We need to recognize and manage the risks. And as Nike says, just do it through outdoor adventure. I'm in the early stages of the analysis. However, inclusive and engaging leadership is important. Being a leader is often not by choice, rather is out of necessity and an interest in people. The physical fitness benefits through the activity is not a primary motivational factor per se. However, participants stay fit in order to ensure their ability to continue their chosen leisure-based activities, and many of them take up memberships to gyms or do shorter, smaller walks so that they can go on the hikes once a week or 3 times a week, or continue their scuba diving. Connectedness with people, the natural environment, and like-minded people are strong motivation for participation. So ever present is the opportunity to learn and abilities. In this regard, it's important to recognize the heterogeneity of older adventurers. There's a mix of hard, soft, micro, and adrenaline junkies across the age ranges of 50 to 85 at this stage. Regardless of the challenge, all recognize the impact on their physical, mental, and social health. And this translates into a consensus that participation impacts positively on their quality of life, resilience, and general ability to cope. So, if I might, I will play you a video. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the image here. A pilot on a social entrepreneur invented this bike. It's a trike. I'm convincing my college to buy one. I'm struggling with the 10 grand that's required to buy it, but I want the students to go out and engage with the community and bring people who may not have the opportunity to cycle because of functional ability to engage in their adventure. And subjectivity around adventure has been discussed a lot here today. So I'll just play a short video and then I'm done. So that's me.
Thanks, Joe. That was absolutely brilliant. I thought at the start of that video it was going to be the Rocky sound song, you know, the soundtrack going up the steps. It had that sort of beat to it. I thought this is going to be impressive. But thank you. That video was absolutely a wonderful finish for your presentation. Does anyone have any questions at all?
A quick one. I just wondered, Joe, you're all right. You haven't got to rush for a bus. Please do if you do. But
no, I've time for.
Yeah. I just wondered, how much does comfort come in? Because I'm aware, you know, there's some stuff in scuba diving about comfort, but you know, particularly in the people getting older, you know, is comfort a major thing, or are these hard old guys and girls who can?
No, an interesting, Carl. I hope I addressed this question properly because it's a great question. My supervisor early on in the research suggested that most people like me that take up adventure activities take them up. Now it was convenient sampling that I used to access my participants, but that they take it up early in life and they're scuba diving since their mid-20s, or they're hill walking since their early 30s or whatever. That's not the case. The majority of them took up these activities closer to their 50s or in their 50s. So they took up, one gentleman took up the activities when the sea swimming, and he swims every day until his best friend passed away. So it's the importance of that community and that relationship. His best friend, and he's 86, and he cycles 10 kilometers daily on a very rough track. So it impacts on his balance, his coordination, and he was the last guy in the video there. He's 86 now, and he's still doing it. And he wants to go back to swimming every day. So he's trying to convince me to come swimming with him every day. don't like the cold, even though I scuba dive. I'm a scuba diving instructor, but I don't really like the cold, so I won't go swimming with them every day. But it's interesting because everybody thinks that these people are hardened people. There's a lady with a torch. She's 75 years of age, and she took up scuba diving when she retired. She retired early at 50, and that's when she took up her scuba diving. So no, the people I've met aren't hardened, seasoned adventurers, with the exception of one out of the 27, and that's the guy on the top of the mountain in the snow. And he's hiking since he was 10 years of age, and he'll proudly tell you, hates being a leader, hates leading, but there's no one else to do it. And he's an absolute gentleman, and he's absolutely inclusive. And on Sunday, when I get back from this conference, I'm going for a hike with that group again. I mean, I've met so many people, I won't say friends, but they're communicating with me still to say, do you want to come out hiking with us again, Joe? You know, and I'm doing that, and it's great for me. So yeah, I think that's part of the research. We need to show that we can join these people up, and we can do it either through small organizations and small groups, and then leaders can be developed and should be supported. Yeah.
Well, I think what's nice as well, you showed the diversity of that group actually as well. It's heterogeneous, isn't it? It's not all the same. So great.
I noticed that Nora has a question, but I'm just a bit conscious of time. But then you've got to jump off, Joe, whereas others will get the chance for questions at the end.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer Nora's question if I can.
Nora, can you do you want to ask the question? But we would need to be quick. If that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Joe, thank you for the presentation. It was brilliant. I was just wondering, actually, you already answered half of the question, which was Cars asking about the seasoned adventurers. But I was wondering whether you looked at the motivations and why these people started doing the different adventure stuff later in life, and what was the kind of turning point of, or was there like a starting motivation that found why they
I'm going to get cut off here. I think really it was about something to do, and there was a man in there that I was standing beside teaching to scuba dive. He learned to scuba dive. I was his instructor at 7 when he was 70 years of age, to do all of his life, but wasn't able to because of work commitments and family commitments, and then took it up in his 70s. At 77, he's still diving. He's still scuba diving, and quite independently, quite autonomously. You know, initially I was fearful when he started with me 7 years ago. My battery's going to die.
Okay, well, we're running out of time, but thanks so much, Joe. Your signal was going as well, just to let you know. Thanks, Joe, and to have a brilliant time at the UNWTO Sports Tourism Conference. We're all seriously jealous of that. Emily, thank you very much. It's always tough waiting to be the last one to present. You sort of build your anxiety up. But yeah, you're up.
Thank you. It's nice to see other people's presentations, isn't it? And yeah, before presenting your own, thank you all for great presentations. Do you want to give a thumbs up, Adele? Can you see?
Yeah, we can see that. Thanks,
okay. So I'm going to put a timer on so that I run to time. Right. So my name's Emily. I am a PhD student. I've just finished my first year and been confirmed into my second year. My topic is about mountaineering leadership and social capital, and today I'm going to talk about one part of it, which is one of my research objectives currently, which is about how social capital is activated within mountaineering leadership in the UK. And so first of all, mountaineering. So mountaineering, the sport or activity of climbing mountains, and a mountaineering leader, someone who leads groups in the mountains, hills and moorlands. I'm going to come back to this shortly and move now on to social capital, which you may already know about. So it's about the value within our social relationships. It's commonly expressed in the term, it's not what you know, it's who you know. However, conceptualizations of it have developed into what's considered to be an umbrella of social capital, demonstrated in this quite dense table on the right-hand side. So at a micro level, so at an individual level, social capital is about the social structures that we belong to, so social networks and the configuration of them, how we relate to each other socially, and how we understand our social relationships, so the shared language and narratives, attitudes that we have within any given group. And it's important because it influences our decision making. It can have positive and negative impact on all of these. So career advancement, income, well-being and health, these all relate to leadership, which is what I'm looking at. After looking into social capital, I got thinking about how social capital is activated and whether leaders can have access to a field and have access to social capital but not have it activated. And this was from two people who are a couple, a male and a female, the same level of experience and skill, knowledge, time in the sector. And the woman reported to me that she very frequently is offered less work than her male partner. So I was thinking about the activation. How is social capital actually activated? She has great connections, as does her male partner. And that brought me on to cultural capital, which then brought me on to culture. So what is culture? So there's some descriptions here, or some words that kind of describe culture from Jefferson and Swider. So codes, rules, schemas, identities, practices, recipes, strategies, norms, and a lot of these cross over with the social capital culture conceptualization that I showed earlier. So cultural capital is about the cultural assets that we possess and our understandings of the social sphere and the social norms. And Bourdieu described these, or categorized these, in 3 ways, which has been extended, but his kind of 3 areas covered: objectives, so the objects that we possess, clothing and gear that indicate that we're part of a culture; embodied, so the language that we use, the language that we speak, our accent, our gender are all elements of embodied capital; and institutionalized, so that's all about training and education, and the pieces of paper that we hold. They kind of signify that we belong to a particular culture, and this all exists within mountaineering leadership. So moving on to mountaineering culture. So mountaineering culture is led by masculine ideals that are expounded by the great man theory of leadership, which is all about values of strength, technical skill, bravery, risk, showing no weakness. And this is all borne out within the literature around mountaineering. So the culture is hegemonic and masculine, white, male, middle class, and this is embedded really deeply in the historical, strict ethical structures that underline and underpin the social norms that we see today. And, excuse me, I've got something squeaking in the background. This has led to an industry that's unequal, is exclusive, and entry is limited by gender, social class, ethnicity. We know that fewer women participate and fewer women lead. There are a great number of constraints and barriers. And in terms of governance, which I might come back to later, the industry is predominantly freelance. It's disunited in terms of its governance. There isn't one organisation that governs the way that leaders operate. There is very little data available about the industry or within any of these organisations. And overall, the industry is underpinned by a neoliberal philosophy. And so thinking about leadership within the industry and looking a bit more closely at the imbalances, at the very top level of qualification, 6% of the people who are qualified are women, which means that 94% are men. So there's a real imbalance up at the top of the industry, which we see in a number of different industries. Okay, so thinking back to this kind of brought me on to social capital and how it's activated, and how we have our social resources, our networks, the social norms that we have access to, and then cultural capital is the activating factor. So without cultural capital, without the cultural assets and understandings of the social sphere and the norms and compliance with those expected norms, social capital is not able to be activated. However, all of that also sits within the dominant culture. So the dominant culture mediates the stores of social capital and the stores of cultural capital that a leader has access to, and whether a leader can even activate the social capital. So in terms of access to these, people aren't assessed fairly and equally in terms of their perceived social influence. That impacts their access, their perceived ability, affects people's access to opportunities. For example, particularly relevant is that women are assessed as less competent than men, even with the exact same task, the exact same outcomes. Women are assessed as less competent. People who don't fit in are excluded. So this Whitaker and Holland-Smith research looked at the ways in which volunteers are excluded and the way that social capital acts as an exclusionary factor. Education as well, and status is subject to hegemonic norms. This all comes together into women in particular accruing fewer resources and being offered fewer opportunities. So in summary, of that, access to activation of social and cultural capital relies on the dominant culture. And so my summary is that the diagram looks a bit more like this. So the dominant culture mediates social capital, it mediates cultural capital, and provides gatekeepers. So the dominant culture is acting as gatekeepers. And this is what my research is going to be exploring. I have undertaken one interview so far with a participant, a leader in the industry, and I've got further interviews lined up. I'm going to come back to that actually. So my research design is from a pragmatist mixed methods paradigm. I'm using online questionnaires, connections mapping, a life history calendar, and an interview with participants. And the results of this are going to be developed into a qualitative stage, which is likely to be an online questionnaire. I thought I would show you what the connections mapping looks like. So this is one example of the connections mapping. I've come up against some challenges actually with the first part of the qualitative process. So getting people to do the connections mapping and the life history calendar. So this is something I'm currently reviewing, considering how I might do that. So my rationale really was based on allowing people, as Harriet has done with her photos, allowing people to think before they come to the interview, but it might be too onerous. So actually I'm reviewing that at the moment. And the participants I'm going to be using or involving in my research, or have started involving, they're people who are trained and qualified across 4 qualifications within mountaineering and rock climbing. They might be working in the sector or they might not be working in the sector. So I'm really interested in what are the influences here in terms of their progression in, or their lack of progression within the sector, what's made them stop, and what are the elements of social capital and cultural capital and that activation that either has or hasn't happened. And in terms of the future, I'm going to wrap up now. In terms of the future, I'm thinking also about how the other capitals might be involved in the activation of social capital, and how they might be involved in the progression of mountaineering leaders within the industry. Yeah, feel free to email me if you have any questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Emily. I know you have to go at 12. So has anyone got any questions for Emily?
Me?
Go on then, Pete.
Yeah, really enjoyed that. Thank you, Emily. It was good. I just wonder a couple of things, whether you're going to locate it in a sort of, you know, feminist post-structuralist framing, because it seems to lend itself to that. Obviously, that is not a suggestion that it is feminist purely, but, you know, using those kind of tropes and researcher attitudes. And then questions, which I'll ask you in a minute. They're big questions. One of which I could perhaps half answer for on your behalf. Why the quants part, and why abductive research when it really seems like it's an exploration of culture and the interplay between shifting habitus and field. So I'm not quite sure how the quantitative part contributes to that, but in assisting you to answer that challenge, it may actually, having a load of quants, if they don't already exist, about the various cultural splits within the industry, within the outdoor leadership industry, if those statistics don't already exist, then you may help to influence policy gatekeepers with statistics. So I think, you know, I think I can see that. I'm just thinking about the, you know, kind of significant and original contribution to knowledge part, which to me, but it wouldn't it, would come from your post-struck feminist in-depth qualitative meanderings.
That's a lot of big questions, Peter. Yes.
It's because I've not had a drink.
Yes, I felt like the quants would strengthen the research and would have more authority, as you suggested, within industry, and might help to situate the social capital, like the social capital dimension of the research. So a lot of the social capital research is quants focused, and I felt like it would be an interesting way to test out on a larger scale some of the outcomes of the qualitative, the qualitative element. And it might be that changes actually, but I'm still feeling that is the way forward, but I am open to change. In terms of the abductive, so there's quite a strong and robust social capital, the social capital umbrella slide that I showed. There's kind of plenty of research, 30,000 articles about social capital, which is just a monster. So I felt like using the pre-existing social capital conceptualization umbrella from Nahapit and Ghoshal would lend itself to using the abductive approach, kind of coming at it like the ebb and flow, I suppose, ebbing and flowing between what is there and what's being found and discovered through the research.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair enough. That's good defense, or whatever you want to call it. You know, that's great. And I mean, I think there are a few points there to add as well. That, you know, Bourdieu was I nearly said, you know, given that this is probably based in a kind of, you know, feminist research paradigm, I would nearly said the great man himself, Pierre Bourdieu. But anyway, Pierre Bourdieu was based a lot of his research on structuralist quantitative research. So there is that, but that is one of the biggest criticisms leveled at his research. And the other is the idea of the what we mentioned in an earlier presentation, you know, about the fluidity of reality and the negotiated status of any given reality or cultures or whatever, that they're always changing and shifting. And indeed, your research, let's hope, will be part of that changing and shifting of the scene as a whole. But great stuff. Well
Thanks for the questions. I've made a note and I will think on them, definitely.
Thanks, Pete. Emily, I don't know if you've got to dash.
What, 2 minutes, probably.
Okay, Ashley, do you want to ask a question?
All right, moving on from what Pete mentioned. So I would concur with the things that Pete has brought to the table there, but I've private chatted you, Emily. You might want to have a look at that with an email address if you want to get in contact. But you were saying that this was a great opportunity to critique the qualitative. I think this would be a great opportunity to critique the quantitative, and maybe consider how you could use the qualitative research that you've done to drive forward some of the quantitative stuff that's happened in the past, and try and upset that imbalance between where we see the pinnacle of our research, always being in the quantitative, and always having to have percentages, bar charts, pie charts, facts and figures to sway people's opinions. This is a chance perhaps to start critiquing some of that stuff rather than critiquing the qualitative. Just a thought there, that's all.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. I've made a note of that. Thanks.
Fascinating stuff though, and people around me doing similar things as well, Emily. So if you wanted to drop an email, I'm leaving that for you to follow up, okay?
I'll drop you an email, thank you.
Right here then.
Thanks, Ashley. Does anyone else have any questions for any of the speakers here today? Oh, Toby, I know you had a question earlier on for Thomas. I don't know if that's your question.
Well, my question was actually for Chris, and I was so worried that I wasn't going to be able to ask him that I actually wrote it to him. But I still think it's an interesting question because I think it's important. And Chris was looking at, and you've published this already, Chris, but confidence.
Some of the early ones are published, but not the later slides. I'm working on it.
Okay, but the one about, so that you're looking at self-efficacy, personal decision-making, and learning on, during, or from adventures. And what I was wanting to know is whether or not Chris had thought about looking at these questions in wicked learning environments, because wicked learning environments are often where adventure takes us. And I'm working with a group right now that's looking at decision-making in backcountry skiing avalanche territory. And there's so many opportunities for not getting feedback, but people nevertheless feel like they have learned. And the results can be deadly if you don't understand the nature of the wicked feedback and the nature of the wicked environment, and the fact that there's a lack of feedback, even though you think you've learned. And so I think that I just wanted to put that on to ask Chris if that's something he's thought about, and I think that would be an interesting place to take it.
I would like to think that I have actually in some regard, because we come with the wicked problems that like the world is messy and complicated, and I've tried really hard to keep a really like practical, impact to my research. I'm still a teacher. I still work with kids. I've just had to run out and check they're not chopping their hands off, and whatnot. But yeah, I think because there's a lot of, avalanche is a good example, but there's lots of talk about decision making and having ownership of that. But of course, the coaches who I observed in those real life scenarios, they were encouraging to decide to stop and then learn from those moments, and where to gather feedback. So there's a whole host of detail that I glossed over very, very briefly to kind of focus on tourism. But in terms of the coach, I sampled a bunch of high level coaches on 2 separate days with different learners, and they would, it was anchored in real world. That was kind of my desire really. And it is perhaps messy and, oh yes, but the trick is they were making time to learn from the experiences, but it was about the ownership of learning being on the participants, not the coach. So the coach was teaching them how to learn from the experiences and when they might stop and try, rather than like a cognitive apprenticeship where I'm like, oh, I'm noticing this and this, therefore we need to do that, and maybe they were verbalizing that as a mechanism, but it wasn't like do X, thinking and then doing X. It was a very conscious, explicit, like, what do we think about here? This is what we structure to come up with some learning that informs our decisions to continue participation. Or, there's a good reference about free skiing in there as well, about learning. So the tourism part of my work is about expanding what's thought about motor skill learning in this context. So it's not enough just to be able to ski perfect eights. You need to know when to ski perfect eights and when to go home and have coffee, you know, and those ideas of autonomy in performance and non-cognitive action in performance, I don't think sit particularly well with our field. Surely some parts are autonomous, because when you start skiing perfect eights, you just need to off you pop. But there's definitely some parts of outdoor and adventure performance where if you are automatic, you probably will kill yourself.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question.
Any other questions for our presenters? No? Okay. I've got a quick question for you, Thomas, if that's okay. So in your participants was a really interesting demographic, because they were mainly men, mainly young men, with a high level of degree. And I was just wondering, were they, what ethnicity were they, or did you find that out, or what, were they all Greek, or were they from different countries? And then my other question was with that is, you talked about different perceptions based on their involvement levels. And I was wondering what you meant by that. What were the different involvement levels?
Okay, thank you, Adele. About the demographics, the questionnaire distributed only in Greek. Of course, from July, start of July until the middle of September, there are plenty of people from abroad. But I distributed only in Greek because it's more easy for me to find some people on mountain huts. Also, a bias for my research is that I went, because it's very busy, I like the other days, and I went not in the weekends, which is usually Monday to Friday. There are most of the people are from Greece, and weekends are from abroad. So it changed a bit. It depends the season, but I went mainly in the Monday, Tuesday, you know, these days. And when I talked about the involvement levels, there is a framework we call the psychological continuum model. The application of this model is mainly in sport leagues again, and leisure activities, but not in outdoors, focused in outdoor activities such as hiking. Let's say leisure activities, fitness or hiking, but in moorland, not on the mountains. Okay, and this model, we can classify people into different stages according to their involvement level, and we can produce different patterns for associations, or different we can investigate the demographics of the different patterns. You know, we can see the segments of our research. I think it's the next step. It's not very insightful in my opinion. It's not very insightful, my results. It could be better with such analysis, with this kind of model.
Okay, that makes sense. It's just you said it. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if their levels of involvement influences their perceptions. But if you haven't looked at that yet, that makes complete sense. I'm very conscious of time. I apologize. Has anyone got any other questions? Otherwise, I'll wrap up. No? Okay, cool. I just want to thank everyone that's still here, and thank you so much, all the presenters. It was absolutely brilliant to hear about all the different work that you're doing. There was a real mixture of activities, of participants, of methods employed as well. I love the fact that you are all at different stages of your doctorate journeys as well. So that was really interesting, just to add that to the mix as well. You all answered the questions really, really well. You presented very clearly, professionally, and with so much confidence. So I think it bodes really, really well for your viva. And Oh, I thought Chris was saying something, but I think he's speaking to someone else. Sorry, Chris. Carl, is there anything that you wanted to add?
No, just to echo Adele's comment, and really insightful presentations, and I love the mix of methodologies and really kind of innovative approaches. So I think our new horizons, I think, are looking very, very rosy in that sense. The only other thing was just to echo that point that we mentioned earlier, in terms of sort of ATRA as an organization is sort of growing in maturity, and how we can look after the PhDs who are part of that family, if you like. So, like we did mention, anything that we can do to sort of support you, either if there was anything that people really felt that they needed now, or whether, that's, just saying, Pete, but a 10-year party, that's what you really need, isn't it? But it is. I mean, obviously, we've heard that social aspects are really important, particularly when you're doing sort of postgraduate research. But anything else that anyone wanted to raise at all, if either here or by all means, just by email or just through the ATRA channels. Yelena always does a fantastic job at keeping us together, and she's the spirit that supports everything. Could
I just
help?
Yes, Pete.
A little something. Just to say that I suppose the whole field of outdoor studies looks to be in very, very good health, with a whole crop of PhDs coming through with really interesting critical positions, where everything from branding to all sorts of different explorations in the field. So thoroughly enjoyable and very, very exciting to see it going on. And what Carl's saying, the more that ATRA can support you in what you're doing, the happier we all are. So let us know.
Yeah, well, it supports us and ensures our longevity as well. So we're not totally altruistic in that. But,
Brilliant. Okay, so I think that will bring the webinar to a close. Thank you all very, very much for coming today and for your questions. If you weren't presenting, thank you for contributing to the webinar. And we hope to see you next year for our 10-year party, if not before. Take care, everyone.
Cheers. Cheerio.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Apologies for my abrupt departure. I'm now at the bus stop.